Hi, it's Brenda, and I want to welcome you to Vintage Texas Crimes. I've got an old crime story to tell you today about a little hill country town called Burnet, Texas. And if you've ever heard of a town called Burnet, it's probably someone mispronouncing Burnet. Burnet, Durnit. That's how they rhyme. So that's the correct way to say it. Anyhow, the crime that I wanted to investigate for this video was happened, like I said, back in 1979, and I was pretty young. My mother told me about it right after it happened because she knew all the parties involved, but I didn't really care. Then the other day, I was writing a story about a bank robber in Thornton, Texas, and I thought, I wonder what happened to this guy. But anyway, mother told me, I just had very little to go on, the bank president was found with counterfeit money after meeting with a woman in a hotel room. So now that I've researched it, see, that's the reputation that man got, which I think is the crime in itself. But now that I've researched it, I can tell you that I think he's probably the only innocent person in this group. Not that everybody was trying to be criminal, some were, but you'll see what I'm talking about. Anyway, imagine this. You're 61-year-old Marshall Pruitt, a married bank president and beloved pillar of the community. People really depend on you to be like a gray rock, as one person said. He he was arrested as he exited a hotel room where he had been with this woman I mentioned, Shera Swope, Shera, Swope, Swope. She was cute and petite and nearly 20 years younger than him. So that's where he was when he was arrested. He walked out into the parking lot from the hotel room carrying a briefcase. It did indeed have counterfeit money in it, and FBI agents and members of the Secret Service were waiting in the parking lot for him, and they were with Burnet County Sheriff R.C. Hullum. All right, so I got most of my information from the archives of the Austin American Statesman and the Dallas News, a few other newspapers, and some public documents. One more detail that's important. This was a nice hotel. It was not a, no-tell by the hour kind of motel. Not at all. It was, in its day, the Highlander Inn was a top-notch facility and restaurant, hotel and restaurant. It wasn't city fancy, but it was a nice place, kind of almost a little bit like a hunting lodge vibe going on, if I recall correctly. And it was definitely a welcoming place for hunters and anglers who were coming to the area for that purpose. So that's one thing that I wanted to tell you. And so you kind of get the visual of this little hill country place we're visiting today. And before I get rolling, I have one more comment, and that is there's more than one version of what happened that night. There's what the police saw, and there's what she said, what he said. So, but he was there with Shera Swope, a woman from Lampasas, 22 miles away, who ran a salvage business in Lampasas. And what she did was bought large lots of salvaged merchandise of all kinds and sold it in a retail storefront. Pruitt was her banker. So when Pruitt opened that door, headlights just flooded him, blinded him, and Sheriff Hullum says to the First State Bank's president that he's under arrest and reads him his Miranda warning. He finds out he's being charged with conspiracy to possess counterfeit money and possession of counterfeit money. That's two charges. Sheriff Swope was also led from the room and loaded into a police car. But what Pruitt did not know is Swope was busted earlier in the day when she handed over $24,000 in genuine cash to purchase $112,000 in counterfeit bills of denominations 50 and 20s. Swope learned when that happened to her earlier that day, she learned that the supplier of her fake money that she had been put in contact with was an undercover FBI agent whom we'll call Mr. Manley. She had previously told him she wanted the funny money for her banker, meaning Mr. Pruitt. Her story was that Pruitt had a banker friend in Mexico, and this banker friend wanted all the US dollars he could get, and he would pay big for it. In fact, he was going to want an ongoing supply. So her story was that Mr. Pruitt reached out to see if she could locate someone who dealt in counterfeit money. Well, the moment she was busted, you can imagine she was right then and there pressed into service. They told her, "You've got to help us bust this guy and this Pruitt fella." And so she said okay. She said okay, and hoping it would get her into a better position for her own trial. So they said, "You've got to have him meet you at the hotel and get him on tape." And we might say tape now, but we usually say recording, because back in the day, it was literally tape they used to record these things on these big old tape recorders. Anyhow, so that they were held separately. She got a $25,000 bond, and he got a $50,000 bond. And I wonder if he thought about that. I wonder why that is, or maybe he didn't even know it. But here's the thing. Marshall Pruitt was said to be the most dependable man in Burnet, Texas. And not to overshadow anybody else, but there was nobody more dependable than Mr. Pruitt. And the mayor, Howard Benton, said he was planted in their community like a big gray rock. And if you needed him, he was there. He helped people getting their businesses going. He wasn't overly friendly or always going out and shaking hands, but he wasn't reclusive either, and people knew that. Here's the thing. Nobody in Burnet believed that he was fooling around with Shera Swope either. And that he didn't think that he was asking for a briefcase of fake money either. So, but why was he in that room that night? So, was he having an affair? No, I don't think that was going on. Again, Mayor Benton said that Marshall Pruitt was not stupid enough to go to the Highlander Inn for a tryst, even if he was having an affair, because someone was likely to see his truck there. And so, I'm not the only one that says he wouldn't do that. If you knew where the Highlander was and everything, you'd say, okay, nobody's going to go there to have an affair. But let's talk about the more drama, the rumble of that just blew everybody's minds and burned it. 20 days later, after that arrest, there was another big shock wave when some more arrests were made. Now, remember the sheriff that was at the hotel to arrest Marshall Pruitt, Sheriff R.C. Hullum. 20 days after Marshall Pruitt and Sheriff Swope were arrested, so was the sheriff, as well as his deputy, Charles Johnson, and a friend of the sheriff's, Bill Lentz. Oddly enough, Bill Lentz had been convicted of 2 felonies, burglary, I think, in 1958 and 1962. So I can't imagine why Sheriff Hullum was even involved with him. But we'll move on. The charge was conspiracy to illegally wiretap a phone. And it was this woman's phone who the sheriff thought she had been distributing drugs. So it didn't cross his mind, apparently, that he should get permission from the federal government, which is a requirement. Bill, his friend, Bill Lentz, was ready to go and do those taps, and he already had procured a piece of equipment to help with the job. Well, let's back up a little bit before Marshall and Shera were arrested. In early February, Sheriff Hullum, Deputy Johnson, and Bill Lentz were sitting around talking about the possibility of tapping that woman's phone that supposedly was distributing drugs, when Bill Lentz popped up for no reason and says, "Hey, you know what? I know a woman named Shera Swope who's looking for a bag of high-quality fake bills." And he just starts discussing and tapping her phone and trying to figure out who she's getting this money for, because she didn't tell him. And in fact, it was Shera, who directly went to Bill Lentz. Well, Sheriff, Sheriff and Sheriff, it's hard to, I hope I don't interchange them. But anyway, Sheriff Hullum was like, okay, we got to handle this. And he goes and immediately gets in contact with the federal government. And they came and talked to Bill Lentz, who then will act like an informant, a little bit of an undercover agent for the FBI and Secret Service, because I didn't know they handle, or they did anyway, counterfeit money issues, but apparently they do. But anyway, he is going to be playing Shera to get more information. So, yes, Shera had indeed gone to Bill Lentz. He was an old friend of hers, or they had done business together or something, but she knew him well enough that she wasn't afraid to ask him about who could I buy some counterfeit money from. Anyway, and she knew he had a criminal record. And who else would you turn to for criminal behavior or criminal activities, but a criminal? So, anyway, she was an attractive woman, like I've said, and Bill didn't want to tell her, oh, no, hell no, I'm not going to get involved in that. He said he would look into it. So they remained, friendly. Well, after that ball is in motion and the feds are involved, Lentz goes back to Shera and says, it's a go. I have found you a counterfeiter with really good, high quality money. So enter Mr. Manley. He is the undercover federal agent, and Lentz is feeling very important going around with Mr. Manley. He takes Mr. Manley to meet Shera. And now, Mr. Manley, like I said, he's an undercover agent. On the way there, Lentz suggests to Mr. Manley that he, Lentz, place a tap on Shera's phone right away and see what they can learn. Manley's like, Lentz, that's illegal, and you're not going to do that. Because Manley's thinking, if we have a real counterfeit situation here, we don't want to ruin it with this yo-yo doing something really stupid like that. So Lentz and Manley go and sit down with Shera, and Manley pretends to be that undercover. I mean, he pretends to be a supplier of counterfeit money. He asked her, who are you buying the money for? And she's, no, I don't want to tell you. But finally she says, okay. And she said, well, I'm buying for my banker, who is Marshall Pruitt. And he has a friend in Mexico that wants a steady stream of it. So this could really be good for you, because she thinks she's talking to a supplier. Well, Manley doesn't let it go, because he's really wanting to make an airtight case here. So he says, well, I need to meet your man, Pruitt. Shera agrees to take him to the bank, but here's the thing. She knew that it would require an appointment to get in there and see him, because he's a super busy guy. And so she just says, well, okay, let's just go to the bank right now, and I'll introduce you to him. So when they show up, naturally, Marshall has someone in his office, and Shera then is able to just wave and say, oh, he's busy. We can't go in there right now. And so Manley says, okay. Manley and Pruitt never speak. Now, Manley tells Shera, okay, I'm going to start working on the fake money for you. In the meantime, Secret Service obtained warrants for putting taps on the bank's phones and Marshall Pruitt's home phone, plus Sheriff's work and home phone. And they record 8 conversations. Now, Mr. Pruitt's side of things, let's let him tell his story, because fortunately for us true crime people, he took the stand, and it's always good if the crook will take the stand and tell their story. And in this case, I think the crime, like I said before, was that this man had anything happen to him. Anyway, lucky for us, Mr. Pruitt took the stand in his trial so everyone could hear how baffled he was about those charges of conspiracy to possess money, counterfeit money. He said Shera told him that she was expecting her lawyer to, this is a little background. Shera had told him she was expecting her lawyer to bring her a check any day for about $100,000 from a settlement that was in the works. So, she had been damaged somehow, and so her lawyer was working on this. She said she had been telling Mr. Pruitt, going and talking to him, I'm going to have all this money. And truly, it was worth probably $800,000 back then, 100,000. But she said, I'm just going to need you to invest it for me. And so he he treated her friendly, maybe even a little, protective male, fatherly. It's what the picture I'm getting here, but I wasn't there. But anyhow, he says okay, and he'll work with her on it. So when Shera brought that man in, he had no idea who it was, and wasn't really concerned about it. But he said it did cross his mind that the man waving at him from the other side of the bank was her lawyer that was working on the settlement. He had been in a meeting, but he could see them through his door, and so he was just friendly and waved. So anyhow, he testified also that he loaned Shera $24,000 out of his pocket. Well, that sounds suspicious right there, but there was a reason for it. During a weekly meeting, Leo Stone, the chairman of the bank's board of directors, told Pruitt, let's don't get involved with Shera Swope any further. But he didn't give a reason. He just wanted the bank to disentangle with the Swopes. And and so, you just want, since he did not give a reason, you just wonder if he said that because he had heard something about them having financial instability, or he knew that they were getting themselves in trouble with the IRS, because I'm pretty sure that was happening based on some of the things that happened later. But anyway, Pruitt said, well, yes, sir, if that's what you want to do, that's what we'll do. And so this conversation was verified in testimony by the vice president of the bank, who had also been in that meeting. Now, in the past, the bank had loaned Shera Swope as much as $80,000, and she had paid it down to $20,000, and her credit was in great standing with the bank. She wasn't a bad credit risk. So then the week after the board meeting, after Pruitt's been told don't lend her any more money, she comes and asks for another loan. And let me just back up and say, I think that businesses that business loans are probably different than individual loans when you're talking about, the factors that could affect whether or not you give a commercial loan or not, which is basically what this was. So sure enough, she comes and asks him to borrow $24,000 to pay for a very large lot of salvaged merchandise for her store. Well, Marshall Pruitt could not extend another loan to her, so he explained during his testimony that he took the money out of his own account and had the bank's cashier put it into 3 cashier's checks totaling $24,000 made out to Mrs. Swope. The cashier testified that as well at trial and verified this to be true. He was not like getting cash to give her or anything like that. So in his mind, he was just making a personal business loan to that woman. That he didn't try to hide it by getting cash and trying to be secretive seemed to also validate his story. Now, a few days later, it is Thursday, February 22nd. Mrs. Pruitt, that's Pruitt's wife, testified at his trial about this day that the phone rang at their home at 6:30 p.m. She answered it, and it was Shera Swope. Marshall talked to her, she said, and when he hung up the phone, he asked his wife, do you want to go with me to the Highlander Inn to pick up a check from Shera Swope? Her settlement check came in, and she wants to give it to me. Mrs. Pruitt said she didn't want to go because she was doing work and she was grubby, and she didn't want to get dressed and go down there. Well, he asked her one more time before he left, are you sure you don't want to get dressed, then come up there and have a drink with these people? And she again said, no, I'm just going to stay at home, get a shower, and get ready for bed. Well, clearly, by that conversation, he wasn't expecting to have some kind of personal meeting with this woman. And he did not intend to pick up counterfeit money, but he thought he was just going to pick up a check from a woman who had just received a large settlement. And it sounded to him apparently like Shera and her husband were at the hotel celebrating the settlement with drinks and dinner, but that was not the case. You know what happens next? Marshall knocks on the door to room 13, goes in and comes out a little later and is arrested. But what happened in that room? Fortunately, the feds were taping, so we can get an idea of what they heard. Pruitt said Shera was in that room alone. Rather than a check for Pruitt, she had an open briefcase on the bed that was full of money. Seeing that much money in a briefcase would be surreal for any banker, and he wondered what bank cashed a settlement check for $100,000 for Shera Swope. Well, on the stand, Pruitt said, I was shocked. I didn't know whether to take the cash, call a person from the bank to come there and witness me picking it up, or to ask for help from law enforcement. Now, from the articles in the 1979 press coverage, when the tape was played in the courtroom that day, Shera said, "You're not interested in quality of the money?" And Pruitt described that he believed it was at that point, he's testifying, he described how he believed she stood up and kissed him while touching his privates. He acknowledged Swope said something about the quality of the money, but he was not thinking about money. And he said he assumed her reference to quality, because this is the way his mind was working, would be about quality of sex if that were to transpire. But he said he didn't even look at the money. He looked at her and kind of trying to figure out what to say. And then she quit what she was doing and she lay back on the bed in did something vulgar. And he said he reached over and touched her, but then he realized, what am I doing here? And he stepped back. So he readily admitted he was thinking about Mrs. Swope, that she was attractive and what was happening, but it was not the money on the bed he was thinking of. So during the tape, things became very muffled and distorted, and Pruitt testified that this was when Shera Swope kneeled down and began to perform beep, beep on him. And that's when he realized he had to leave before things got went any further. He didn't even want to discuss it with her. He's just like, okay, well, I need to go. And he just got out of the room. He did not deny he was attracted to her, but this behavior from her both surprised and embarrassed him. The tape actually verified he never discussed the money. He picked up the briefcase of settlement money he thought she wanted him to take, closed it up, and left. As soon as he walked out the door, he was arrested, and that was the end of his career as a banker after being a banker for 35 years. Shera Swope was supposed to be the star witness against Marshall Pruitt in his trial, but the prosecution never called her to the stand. I suspect they knew that she would be a disaster after hearing how calmly and clearly Pruitt explained and refuted their side of the story, and he told what had happened in that hotel room, and even their own taped conversations put in the light that Mr. Pruitt put it into would somewhat verify and certainly would not refute what he said. His trial ended in a hung jury, and he agreed to plead to a misdemeanor rather than go through that trial again. Now let's fast forward. 19 days later, Pullum, Lentz, remember Sheriff Pullum, Lentz, and Johnson met in the sheriff's office once again about wiretapping the woman's home where they believed the drug activity was going on. Earlier in the year, Deputy Jack Hall had heard these discussions, and so had another deputy in the department by the name of William Fargo. Fargo was the liaison from Burnet to the Greater Austin Crime Task Force. Both Fargo and Hall knew they could not stand by while the three, Hullum, Lentz, and Johnson, planned to do something illegal. So they took it to the Greater Austin Crime Task Force. On March 7th, an FBI agent met with Hall and Fargo, and they began wearing wires. Hall and Fargo began wearing wires in the office. Hullum, Johnson, and Lentz were all arrested a week later. Jack Hall was appointed sheriff for the interim of 3 years. The town was crushed to lose their sheriff, which they had just put in office, and did all they could to support him. It was another thing like he couldn't have been guilty of this. But you can read, go back and read the evidence or read the newspaper articles and make your own decision. But like Pruitt, Hullum's job was also lost and the book was closed on his career in law enforcement. The aftermath was that Bill Lentz and R.C. Hullum were tried in federal court and both were found guilty. They were each given about 9 months in prison, which they appealed, and in March 1981, the appeal was denied, and I actually did not research it any further than that. So I don't know if they ever did their time or if they appealed again or what happened. But hang on, there's more to tell about Shera Swope. I believe, this is my opinion, I believe Swope was lying the entire time about Mr. Pruitt being involved. I think she wanted the money for another scheme. I don't know what. And there was no $100,000 check that would have ever come. That was a scam that she and her aunt would use again, and probably had done it before. Shera Swope's future acts proved to me that she was a pretty bad criminal, and Mr. Pruitt knew absolutely nothing about the counterfeit money. He was a friend to her. He was kind to her and didn't realize she was just a stone cold psychopath, because that is how her behavior makes me think she is, but I'm no trained psychologist. To Swope, Pruitt's only role was to loan her the $24,000 so she could buy the counterfeit bills. I don't have any insight on how Pruitt made a living after all that happened or what he did after February 22nd, and he was, just convicted of a misdemeanor. But he and Mrs. Pruitt stayed married, and when he was able to leave the courtroom with her that day after the mistrial, she was happy and she hugged him. His children adored him until the day he passed away, and they wrote a beautiful obituary. So he came out okay. It was little he could have done to avoid this. She was a force that would go on to hurt others. And now let me tell you about her after 1979. Within 3 years of the counterfeit scheme, maybe sooner, Shera was pulling another caper. She was 46 when she embarked on this next scheme, but she didn't let her age or her maturity, which you would hopefully gain some of that as you go along, that she didn't let any of that impede her acting like a psychopath again. No way. She helped her aunt, Lorena Love Widmer, steal from a dear friend of Lorena's. They stole from a woman named Eslar Rutherford, who was quite wealthy. Widmer and Rutherford met in 1982, and they were both widows. And because they were conning her, she bonded to Miss Widmer, Lorena Widmer, quickly. Shera helped her aunt fool and scam several people over the next couple of years regarding the Rutherford money. They both pretended Lorena's late husband had left her a large multi-million-dollar estate, but it was in a Swiss bank. Shera would enthusiastically discuss the big inheritance coming to her good old Aunt Lorena, waiting there in Switzerland, and now it's hung in probate. Well, any day now, that should be settled, and her aunt would receive a check for a settlement on that probate estate. And does that sound familiar? Well, the money from the Swiss accounts did not come as quickly as planned. Imagine that. The Swiss authorities demanded that Aunt Lorena get enough money to pay Swiss inheritance taxes before she could have her money. And that's how they conned Mrs. Rutherford into giving $35,000 and $50,000 and $200,000, on and on. giving more and more money to Lorena. But the amount attributed to Shera's part of the theft was $511,000. That's just Shera's part. But there may have been 2 or 3 times as much more than they could prove that she benefited by stealing from this lady, because Lorena converted as much of those checks as she possibly could at a bank several miles outside of Lampasas, where Miss Rutherford would not learn that this was happening. Well, okay. So they've met in 1982. In February of 1983, Mrs. Rutherford and Aunt Lorena did reciprocal wills. If Esler Rutherford went first, her estate went to Lorena. If Lorena died first, her estate went to Esler Rutherford. Mrs. Rutherford's health began to fail in October 1983. After Mrs. Rutherford became ill, Lorena Widmer hustled off to get a power of attorney and have her sign it, which she did. And Widmer got into her safe deposit box, Rutherford's safe deposit box, and cleaned it out. Now, Mrs. Rutherford passed away in 1984, and her family, to whom the estate had been originally going to before she met Lorena Widmer in 1982, insisted on a little bit of transparency. So they audited Rutherford's estate. And that's when Lorena Widmer and Shera Swope were caught. And the authorities did an amazing job of tracking down little things like Shera Swope's husband took $200,000 in cash to get a cashier's check for the IRS. So they were in trouble with the IRS. But anyway, Shera Swope served time for that. She spent 20 years in prison for that crime. Her sentence included a provision that she could not apply for parole if she didn't have the money to pay back the full $511,000. So she had to do every stinking day of her sentence, which is the best thing about her crime record, because when she got out in 2004, she was 63, and she married, it's like out of jail, marry a man. She married a nice, apparently respectable man who had a nice retirement check coming from a lifelong career at Dow Chemical Company. And he also had a social security check coming in. And that sustained them well at that point in their lives. And they bought a house in Lampasas. And they were married until his death in 2022. However, Shera wasn't quite ready to settle down. In 2015, Shera's 80-year-old fingers got sticky again. She stole from another elderly person to the tune of $215,000 this time. They didn't figure it out and arrest her until 2020, I think it was March of 2020, and that's when basically the country got shut down for COVID. So she didn't have to go to trial for that until 2022. And by that time, she's 82 years old, and she's got 4 years of probation. That's all she got because, I think the older you get, the less likely you're going to, unless it's a really bad murder or child molestation type case, I don't think you're going to serve time after you're in your 80s in Texas. I looked it up. That's kind of what it said. Shera was caught stealing again at ages 87 and 89, and not for just little, picking up a little cash here and there. It was the two of those together they totaled $189,000. Again, she received 5 years probation. So with her 511 from 1985, 215, 2022, and 189 in 2025, she had stolen from people $916,000, nearly $1 million. And it's doubtful that she ever paid a dime back, which is pretty disgusting. And there's one more little tidbit, and we're going to wrap this up. Shera had a string of names that she was used. Shera, Edwina, and Puff or Puffy Swope. Puff Griffin or Puppy Griffin. I don't know what that means. I mean, you kind of got to wonder if she got that name in 1985 to 2000 when she was 2004 when she got out of jail. She must have gotten out of jail in 2005. So maybe the man wanted a prison wife. I don't know. Maybe they married right before she got out. Anyhow, she will be 90 years old this July. And as far as I know, she's still alive. So with her in the world, I guarantee you, you better keep your money close. And if you enjoyed this story about Burnet and 1979, please like, share, and follow me. And let me know if you know of any little small town crimes that happened in Texas, and I'll try to work up a story with it. Thank you. I appreciate y'all.